Hello and welcome to today's stream. I'm Poetic Heretic, and indeed we will be continuing our analysis of The Nature of Personal Reality, a Seth book by Jane Roberts. So as usual, if you're watching when this is not live, you may fast forward until 5 minutes in, where we will begin with the main part of the material. While in the meantime, I get everything else set up. Right, how do we sound?
Dr. Schultz, silence as insoles that are clinically proven to provide all-day comfort. Dr. Schultz, smart to move.
How do we sound?
Dr. Schultz, smart to move. How do we sound?
Okay, I'm pretty sure we sound just fine. All right. So we'll be beginning here in a few minutes. Hey there, Ginny. You're gonna go to a basketball game? That's cool. I'm doing well enough, thanks, though I do feel a little bit like vibrationally off today, but I've faced far worse, so for the most part I'm doing well, I guess, or I'm doing okay enough. Hope you're doing well as well. So let's see, I'll tweet live now more of the nature of personal reality. Collage. Sending your 111 donation. Oh, well, thanks so much, Ginny. You don't have to do that. You don't have to, but thanks so much. For me, it's not really hard work. It's just having fun. So, I guess it's true what they say about following your passion and excitement. All right, we'll be beginning in just over a minute. All right, so we are now 5 minutes in, so I'm gonna charge my phone, get it plugged in, and we shall begin. And thanks again for that donation, Jenny. I really appreciate it. So again, I'm Poetic Heretic, and we are resuming with Chapter 5 today of The Nature of Personal Reality. So, without further ado, let us begin. Chapter 5, The Constant Creation of the Physical Body. Chapter 5, Pause, the Constant Creation of the Physical Body. As mentioned, parentheses in Chapter 4, the conscious mind is a portion of the inner self. That part I'm fucking this up from the beginning. That part that surfaces, so to speak, and meets physical reality more or less directly. You are mainly concerned now with physical orientation and the corporeal materialization of inner reality. Therefore, the conscious mind holds in ready access the information that you require for effective day-to-day living. It is not necessary that you hold in steady consciousness data that does not directly apply to what you consider your physical reality at any given quote-unquote time. Parentheses, pause, one of many. As soon as the need for such data, aid, information, or knowledge arises, then it is immediately forthcoming unless your own conscious beliefs cause a barrier. The exquisite, precise, and concentrated focus of your conscious mind is quite necessary in physical life. It is because of this highly selective quality that you can, quote-unquote, tune into the particular range of activity that is physical. So let's see here. So when Seth says the conscious mind holds in ready access the information that you require for effective day-to-day living, and it is not necessary that you hold in steady consciousness data that does not directly apply to what you consider your physical reality at any given time. I think what he's basically saying is we ought to trust that we will know what we need to know when we need to know it. And what's so weird about this is that this very idea applies to the spiritual challenge that I seem to be having today, on this very day in my life. Like this, this theme or this idea has been quite active within me, where it's for some reason I'm finding it's a struggle for me, at least at the moment, to trust that I'll know what I need to know when I need to know it. And so, isn't that some weird synchronicity here? Ideal idea, indeed. So, well, maybe Seth will have the answers that I seek, even though I've already read this book, like, well, some parts more than once, but at least once through. Some parts a couple of times. Anyway. Selective consciousness. They also focus their attention in very specific directions, perceiving from a vast general field of perception stimuli that is quote-unquote recognized and accepted in an organized manner. Now, the animal's conscious minds, connected with their physical brains, make this necessary selectivity possible. Without it, there would... hang on. Okay, I thought the page turn got distorted for a moment, but we're good. Without it, there would be an quote-unquote out-of-focus effect that would make physical survival impossible, so certain portions of the inner self come to the foreground of being. New sentence. Because your mind in life is connected with the brain and the physical organism, it is automatically attuned to corporeal reality, and to some extent, of course, it ignores some non-physical data that lies within any given field of perception. Quite simply, it does not allow it into its organizing perceptions. It, brackets the data, is then blocked out. Again, this is quite necessary. There is some information and data that does not, quote-unquote, apply to physical reality. Some of it is perceived by, quote-unquote, non-physical entities who organize it into their system of reality, where it does have meaning, but we will not be concerned with it here. While you are physical, then, you will always be concentrating upon certain data to the exclusion of other data. In other kinds of realities, you may ignore the physical system entirely, however, focusing instead upon those systems of existence that are not now recognized. With your present life, the conscious mind assesses physical reality and has behind it all the energy, power, and ability of the inner self at its disposal. Any information that it requires will be available. Its job is to assess that reality effectively, using that fine focus mentioned earlier. See Chapter 2. Because of its character, consciousness, or the conscious mind cannot be swamped by too much detail, too much information. The inner self sends to it only the information it asks for or feels necessary. To a very large extent, then, conscious beliefs act as great liberators of such inner data, or as inhibitors of it. Are you following me? Parentheses, yes. Seth asked the question because of a prolonged burst of hammering from the apartment below us. 10:16. The conscious mind is itself developing and expanding. It is not a thing. It learns through experience and through the effects of its behavior. The inner self brings about whatever results the conscious mind desires. It does not leave the conscious mind at loose ends nor isolated from the fountains of its own being. Because the conscious mind is part of the inner self, it is obviously made of the same energy, filled with the same vitality, and revitalized by the deep sources of creativity from which all being emerges. You must understand that it is not cut off from the inner self. The inner self keeps the physical body alive even as it formed it. The miraculous constant translation of spirit into flesh is carried on with inexhaustible energy by these inner portions of being, but in all cases the inner self looks to the conscious mind for its assessment of the body's condition and reality, and forms the image in line with the conscious mind's beliefs. So, once more, you form reality through your beliefs, and your most intimate production is your physical body. Your beliefs about it are constantly fed into inner data. You organize on an unconscious level the atoms and molecules that compose your cells to form your body. But the blueprint is made by your conscious beliefs. To change your body, you change your beliefs, even in the face of physical data or evidence that conflicts. You each have a body and you each have a consciousness. You can practice with these ideas by applying them to your body. For now, we are taking into consideration the fact that, generally speaking, you are not going to make yourself 5 physical feet taller if you are a grown adult already, because there are certain physical laws with which you must contend. We will discuss those more fully later. In that context, you can even appear taller and affect others as if you were, which would usually be what you wanted in any case under the circumstances. But except for some conditions which will be mentioned later, you can become healthy if you are ill, slim if you are overweight, gain weight if you prefer, or alter your physical image in profound fashion through the use of your ideas and beliefs. They form the blueprint by which you make your body, whether you have known this or not. Your body is an artistic creation, formed and constantly maintained at unconscious levels, but quite in line with your beliefs about what and who you are. You may take a break. All right, that's where we will take a very brief, 30-second or so break, and then resume. Very grateful for your intimate chat room when you read books. Thanks, Lumen. I like it as well. I like how I can interact with people so easily on here. And probably part of the reason for that is that I don't have dozens and dozens or hundreds of viewers or whatever, so it's a lot easier to read and interact with the chat. All right, so one moment and then we will continue. Okay, let's see. I guess my phone still gets charged. And let us continue. 10:37 to 10:55. Now, Dictation. You constantly give yourself suggestions about your body, your health, or ill health. You think about your body often then. You send a barrage of beliefs and instructions to the inner self that affect your physical image. As I mentioned earlier, your thoughts have a very definite vital reality. Beliefs are thoughts reinforced by imagination and emotion concerning the nature of your reality. Now, thoughts in general possess an electromagnetic reality, but whether you know it or not, they also have an inner sound value. You know the importance of exterior sound. It is used as a method of communication, but it is also a byproduct of many other events, and it affects the physical atmosphere. Now, the same is true about what I will call inner sound, the sound of your thoughts within your own head. I am not speaking here of body noises, though you are usually oblivious to these also. Inner sounds have an even greater effect than exterior ones upon your body. They affect the atoms and molecules that compose your cells. In many respects, it is true to say that you speak your body, but the speaking is interior. The same kind of sound built the pyramids, and it was not sound that you would hear with your physical ears. Such inner sound forms your bone and flesh. The sound exists connected with, but quite apart from, the mental words you use in thinking. Parentheses, pause at 11:05. It might be noted here that Seth devoted a group of sessions last November, December, and January to some of the meanings and uses of inner and outer sound. That material was new to us and included information on the Egyptians' use of quote-unquote inaudible sound to help build the pyramids. According to Seth, the Romans also employed such sound in erecting the enormous, truly awesome city of Heliopolis at Baalbek, in what is now the Middle Eastern country of Lebanon. See the continuation of these notes at the end of the session. End of parentheses. We're going to talk about ringing in the ears. I hope so. I can't quite recall if Seth addresses that in this or not. But I know I've heard that some people, well, have a theory on that that's actually a detector of reality. But then others will say, oh, that's just hearing damage or whatever. I don't know. My ears ring all the time, so I have like all my life. All right, so let us continue. It does not matter in which language you are addressing yourself, for example. The sound is formed by your intent, and the same intent, I am putting this simply now, will have the same sound effect upon the body regardless of the words used. Parentheses, as Seth, Jane paused during her delivery. She evidently changed her mind about just what to say and how to say it. But usually you think in your own language, and so in quite practical terms, the words and the intent merge. For all practical purposes, then the two are one. When you say, I am tired, mentally you are not only giving silent messages to yourself. I say messages rather than message because the general statement is broken down. Many portions of the body must be affected before you feel tired. But beside this, the inner sound value of the messages automatically affects the body in just that way. What should you do, then, if you find yourself feeling tired? This is your conscious assessment of your body's reality at a given time. You want to change it so you do not reinforce it. Instead, you say mentally that the body can now begin to rest and refresh itself. You take your initial judgment for granted then without restating it, and instead suggest the remedy be carried out, parentheses, positively. So that's very interesting there, what Seth says about when you feel tired, instead of saying, I feel tired, give yourself a suggestion that your body can now begin to rest and refresh itself. I've tried that before from time to time with some level of success, it seems, but other times it almost feels, for me personally, like it's almost the path of least resistance to just sort of admit and accept, oh, I feel tired right now, if I feel tired. So I don't know, I guess maybe it's more of an individual kind of thing. You can, if the conditions warrant, physically rest by lying down or making whatever adjustments seem appropriate. If none are possible, then several such suggestions that the body can refresh itself will give you benefit. To tell yourself over and over that you are tired, however, reinforces the condition. The inner sound value of the countering suggestion automatically begins to refresh the body. It is fashionable now to think about noise pollution, yet the same kind of circumstances occur with inner sound, particularly when your inner thoughts are self-contradictory, scrambled, and random. 1123. Diverse and highly conflicting instructions are then given to the body. As you should know, the body's inner environment changes constantly, and it is you who change it. Change is quite necessary, and as a rule, the body's overall balance is maintained. But the directions that you give are often not clear or advantageous, and your beliefs largely determine the kind of information you send to that environment. The inner self always attempts to maintain the body's equilibrium and health, but many times your own beliefs prevent it from coming to your aid with even half of the energy available to it. Often only when you are in dire straits do you open up the doors to this great energy, when it is much too clear that your previous beliefs and behavior have not worked. You have at your disposal the means to ensure your health. My friend Joseph, parentheses, as Seth calls me, brought up a point concerning this before our session. He wanted to know why so many in this country wore glasses. He wondered if people unacquainted with glasses and suddenly introduced to them would develop a need for them, and they would. Many individuals are given glasses to correct an eye difficulty at an early age. Left alone, in many cases, the eyes would correct themselves. The glasses can impede any such self-correction by providing a crutch that further weakens eye muscles, for example, and instead fixes the condition. When you believe that only glasses will correct poor vision, then only glasses will. Instead, you must discover the reason for the belief behind the physical poor function or non-function, and if this is done, the condition will automatically clear up. Now, for most people, it is easier to get glasses. We will end dictation, parentheses, okay. We will be going into the medical profession, and it is too late for that. Now, Rupert should go along with the continuing relaxation sessions as they occur, and try to capture his mental state then in ordinary times. And I bid you a fond good evening. Parentheses, good night, Seth. Thank you very much. Tell him that my energy has always been available to him. He can use it freely and fully. It will not negate or block out my existence. It is available at all times, and it is also his by right, and mine by right. It belongs to all beings by right. It is simply manifested in many ways at many times. And good night. Parentheses, good night. End at 11:37 p.m. Jane still felt more or less relaxed. Floppy, she laughed. I haven't done a damn thing since 3 o'clock this afternoon except get supper and have the session, and right now I feel pretty fine. We think her relaxation follows naturally enough in the wake of her prolonged, intense psychic activity. She had no session Monday night, for instance, nor did Seth come through an ESP class last night, and she's already called off her writing class for this Thursday afternoon. Adding to the 11:05 note on sound, the 1971 to 72 sessions mentioned there also contained much about the inner meanings of sound and Jane's development and use of Sumari, and once again I refer the reader to her introduction. As Seth told us, quote, Sumari effectively blocks the automatic translation of inner experience into everyday verbal stereotypes, end quote. One of its services will be to teach Jane to free her inner cognitions enough so that she can translate speaker manuscripts without distorting them out of all proportion. As with Sumari, we expect that references to the speakers will be included in this book from time to time. In reincarnational terms, the speakers are teaching personalities who reach across the centuries. Seth commented in chapter 20 of Seth Speaks, quote, the speakers, more than most, are highly active through all aspects of existence, whether physical or non-physical, waking or sleeping, between lives or at other levels of reality, end quote. Ironically, many of the very ancient speaker quote-unquote manuscripts are entirely verbal. They weren't put into writing because of the beliefs of the times. All right, and that concludes that session. So we'll take a brief break and then we will continue. So Seth is already beginning to get into some of his delicious heresy regarding the medical profession and physical conditions. I love it. Anyway, so let me see here. Let me drink some water. the information, like getting your vision fixed. Oh boy. So I guess you wear glasses then. Yeah. Well, needless to say, that's a common challenge, and it isn't exactly going to be easy for anyone who has worn glasses for some time or has had any difficult physical condition for some time to all of a sudden change their beliefs and truly believe that they don't need the glasses or they don't need the medicine or they don't need whatever and can just like heal on their own. And yet it is theoretically possible. So at least everything I've seen in my life tells me that it's theoretically possible. Some of the biggest changes in my life have taken place through changing my beliefs, basically. So I've seen the evidence. Now I almost feel like there's something else I wanted to mention. Maybe it'll come to me while I check on a couple of things. $2,700. Not quite sure what that means. But I think what I was just going to say earlier, and like in connection to some of the stuff we're reading, be in a state of peace all the time. And then there's another belief or aspect of me that says I want to be active and creative much all the time, but at least much of the time. And I think the challenge for me in trying to reconcile these opposing beliefs is that theoretically not really do much of anything at all, maybe do some things, but not very much of anything at all, and I could literally just be in a state of feeling really, really good all the time. But it's like, I don't know, is that really the kind of life that I want to live? It's like, well, what about using my skills and abilities and creativity, which I also very much enjoy. But I don't know what the answer is exactly, because I can't just do something like this and be in a state of total peace while I'm doing it, or at least if I can, I haven't figured out yet how. Like when like when I stream or when I'm doing anything other than, I don't know, being in a calm, relaxed state, I'm focused. I'm in a more focused state, and it's hard for me to just be at peace in the midst of all that. So I don't know, that remains my challenge at this time. But this is what happens when you end up having very conflicting beliefs. It leads to inner confusion and distortion. Helen Keller Day. Or Keeler, wait. Let me Google that. Yeah, it says here she was the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Wow. Born June 27th, Cancer. Interesting. I'm saying I should start a National Helen Keller Day. We all wear masks so we can't see, so we appreciate her eyeballs. Ah, interesting. We'll all wear masks. Reminds me of V for Vendetta. Battery's still charging away. All right. So anyway, that was a nice little break between the sessions, and now let us continue. Session 624, October 30th, 1972, 9:45 p.m., Monday. Now, good evening. Good evening, Seth. We will continue dictation. To be healthy, you must believe in health. A good physician is a changer of beliefs. He will replace an idea of illness with one of health. Whatever methods or drugs he uses will not be effective unless this change of belief takes place. Unfortunately, when man became a labeler, he also made maps, so to speak, of great complexity, categorizing various diseases with greater effectiveness than ever before. He studied dead tissue to discover the nature of the disease that killed it. Physicians began to think of men as carriers of disease and diseases, which, in certain terms, they, brackets the physicians, did themselves create through some new medical procedures. The old medicine men often dealt far more directly with the patient himself, and understood the nature of beliefs and the prime importance of suggestion. Many of their techniques were adopted for their psychological shock value, in which the patient was quite effectively, quote-unquote, brainwashed out of the disease he believed that he had. The present medical profession is sadly hampered because of its own beliefs. Often it operates as a framework, and these are not only accepted as normal, but the concepts behind them strengthened. Here you have again, as in psychoanalysis, a hide-and-seek arrangement in which both doctor and patient take part. See the 616th session in Chapter 2. Both believe they need the other, of course. Behind this is the psychic pattern of beliefs in which the patient often assigns to the doctor the powers of knowledge and wisdom that his beliefs have taught him he does not have. Knowing otherwise, the patient still wants to consider the doctor omnipotent. Knowing otherwise, the patient still wants to consider the doctor omnipotent, it says. Upon the patient, a doctor often assigns and projects his own feelings of helplessness against which he combats. The interactions continue with the patient trying to please the doctor, and at best merely changing from one group of symptoms to another. Far too often the doctor shares the patient's unshakable belief in poor health and disease. Not only this, but the medical profession often provides blueprints for diseases, and the patient too often tries them on for size. This is not to say that the medical profession often is not of great aid and benefit, but within the value system in which it operates, much of its positive influence is negated. Because they are held in such high esteem, the suggestions given by doctors are paid particular attention. The patient's emotional condition is such that he or she readily accepts statements made under such circumstances less critically than usual. The naming and labeling of quote-unquote diseases is a harmful practice that to a large extent denies the innate mobility and ever-changing quality of the psyche as expressed in flesh. You are told that you have quote-unquote something. Out of the blue, quote-unquote it has attacked you, and your most intimate organs, perhaps. You are usually told that your emotions or beliefs or system of values have nothing to do with the unfortunate circumstances that beset you. 1008. The patient, therefore, often feels relatively powerless and at the mercy of any stray virus that might come along. The facts are that you choose even the kind of illness that you have according to the nature of your beliefs. You are immune from ill health as long as you believe that you are. These are quite practical statements. Your body has an overall body consciousness filled with energy and vitality. It automatically rights any imbalances, but your conscious beliefs also affect this body consciousness. Your muscles believe what you tell them about themselves. So does every other portion of your body, of your physical body. While you believe that only doctors can cure you, you had better go to them, because in the framework of your beliefs, they are the only people who can help you. But the framework itself is limiting, and again, while you may be cured of one difficulty, you will only replace it with another as long as your beliefs cause you to have physical problems. Now, the same applies to what is frequently called spiritual healing. If through the concentrated use of psychic energy your body is cured by such a healer, you will also simply trade those symptoms for others unless you change your initial beliefs. Now, sometimes a healer or a doctor, with his effectiveness in healing a condition, will show you by inference that the healing energy was always within yourself, and this realization may be enough to allow you to change your beliefs about health entirely. In such a case, you will realize that your previous ill health was caused by your belief. If you have any physical problems, concentrate instead upon the healthy portions of your body and the unimpeded functions that you have. In the healthy areas, your beliefs are working for you. As I mentioned, parentheses, in the last session, inner sounds are extremely important. Each of the atoms and molecules that compose your body has its own reality and sound values that you do not hear physically. Each organ of your body then has its own unique sound value too. When there is something wrong, the inner sounds are discordant. The unharmonious sounds have become a part of that portion of the body as a result of the inner sound of your own thought beliefs. That is why it is vital that you not reinforce these inner sounds through repeating the same negative suggestions to yourself. Verbal suggestions are translated into inner sound. This passes through your body in somewhat the same way that some kinds of light do. You may take a break. All right, I guess we will take a little break too. I need to turn my heater down real quick. It's so tricky when the temperature's like this because, like, I don't know if I need like a little bit of heat or like medium heat or what I need. Maybe no heat. Like, it's so difficult to figure out. So you might see me adjusting my heater multiple times during the stream. I don't know. Let's see. My words are out of context after your pause. I chat as you read. Understood. Let's see. Good dentist is pretty vital. Not sure about the rest of the specialties. Feel like we can handle the rest with proper choices. And eye doctor, of course, my bad. Yeah, like I'm certainly not doubting that the medical profession has its benefits. You know, it exists because it's the system that works for so many people for where they are, even if it does have limiting beliefs built in. And it's funny because, you know, there are those out there who worship the religion of science, who, upon hearing these kinds of words from Seth, would be absolutely outraged because their argument is basically that it is not scientifically sound. Well, what is abundantly clear to me, but seems to not be abundantly clear to anyone else, is that really there's no way to prove that the scientific viewpoint is any more or less likely to be accurate than what Seth is suggesting here, or the viewpoints of many people that are spiritual and interested in like alternative ways of healing, including using the mind to heal the body, and the idea that it's really all it all begins in the mind. It all begins in a person's vibration that determines their state of physical health. Like, what those who worship the religion of science don't seem to realize is that ultimately that too is just a system of belief. There is, just because it's scientific doesn't make it any more or less valid criteria for determining the truth of things. It's simply one modality that is not any more or any less potentially accurate or valid, or at least, what's the best way to put this? It's only one modality that is not any more or less credible, not any more or less reliable, not any more or less provable than any other modality. And they'd say, oh, but we can prove it scientifically. Yes, you can prove it with your own system. Like, it doesn't, see, that's the thing that I feel like they don't realize. It doesn't count if the way that you're proving that your way works is using your own way. Like, it doesn't count to prove that logic works if you are using it with logic, or if you're using logic to prove that. Just like on the other side of things, it wouldn't count to prove that the spiritual perspective works by using spiritual principles or modalities, by using spirituality itself to try to prove that the spiritual way works. And some people might say, well, why do I believe what I believe? And I say, that's not even the point I'm getting at here, that one is better than the other. The point I'm getting at here is that whether people want to accept it or not, whether you hold a more spiritual view or a more scientific view or whatever view you hold, you still made a choice. There is no such thing as being objective, only the illusion of being objective, at least when it comes to the way that one looks at stuff like this, a particular mode of perception. You're still, I don't care how scientific you think that you are, you're still choosing to believe that ultimately. You're choosing to believe that it works. And you say, oh, but there's proof. And I say, yeah, there's scientific proof in your modality. Well, guess what? In the spiritual modality, there's proof in that as well. That is spiritual proof. So again, it's neither one is any more or less provable than the other. So let's see. Six of Swords, I would say. Thoth deck, yeah. Yeah, I know. Before you even mentioned Thoth deck, I immediately thought, oh yeah, science. And that would be ultimately what I argue more than anything as well, is that I see, my personal view anyway, is that science is a valid and critical part of the whole. That's my interpretation of things. I don't disclude anything. My whole idea is having a holistic view that is inclusive of everything. All right, so without further ado, let us continue. (1025 to 1035). Now, while you are physical creatures, then your perceptions must be largely physically oriented. Even your bodies exist in other terms than you usually suppose. You perceive them as objects with bulk composed of bone and flesh. They also have quote-unquote structures of sound, light, and electromagnetic properties that you do not perceive. These are all connected with the physical image that you know. Any physical disabilities will show themselves in these other quote-unquote structures initially. The sound, light, and electromagnetic patterns give strength and vitality to the physical form that you recognize. They are more mobile than the physical body, and even more susceptible to the changing pattern of your own thought and emotion. I told you that thoughts are translated into this inner sound, but thoughts always attempt to materialize themselves also. As such, they are incipient images, collectors of energy. They build up their own embryonic form until it is one way or another physically translated. Mental images, therefore, are extremely powerful, combining inner sound and its effects with a clear mental picture, which will seek physical form. Your imagination adds motivating and propelling power to such images, and so you will find that many of your beliefs are entertained by you in an inner visual manner. They will have mental pictures connected with them. One such image may represent one particular belief, or it may stand for several. As you make lists of your beliefs, you will find some of these pictures coming into your mind. Look at them as you would a painting you have created. If you do not like what you see, then quite consciously change the picture in your mind. These images are interior, yet because they are so a part of your beliefs, you will see them exteriorized also in your experience. 1048. Let me give you a simple example. You have a sore toe. Now and then you see it quite clearly in your mind. You may find yourself looking at the toe more frequently than usual, and you may also find yourself picking out from the populace anyone who is not walking properly. These people might escape your notice ordinarily, but suddenly the world seems to be full of sore toes. We're dealing to make a point with a belief already made physical. But if you continued such concentration, the toe either would not heal or would develop into a worse condition. Behind all this, of course, would be the belief that caused the difficulty. But once you have brought about a group of symptoms, you must be very careful that you do not begin to view your field of reality from that position. When you do, you add both inner and outer images that reinforce the condition. There is light then that you do not see with physical eyes, as there is sound that you do not hear with your ears. These combine to mentally form the physical image that you know, so you must work from the inside out. Your beliefs are your palette, using the analogy of a painting again. Your thoughts give the general outline of the reality that you physically experience. Your emotions will fill in the patterns with light. Your imagination will forge these together. The sound of your inner thoughts is the medium that you actually use. This is far more than an analogy, however, for in simple terms it explains quite clearly the way in which your beliefs form your reality. In quiet moments, the word Om, said slowly, mentally, or aloud, will be of benefit in toning up your general physical condition. The sounds contain within them a built-in impetus toward energy and well-being, as I will explain shortly. Now, I am going to end for this evening. I will resume, however, at our next session. If you have questions, I will answer them. Parentheses, no. Then I bid you a fond good evening. The same to you, Seth. Louder, and my heartiest regards to you both. Thank you, good night. End at 11:05 p.m. Jane remembered none of the material she delivered since last break. All right, since we just took a break a little bit ago, we'll just take a very brief break and then continue. Okay, everything's looking good. Yeah, it still drives me crazy though. I think to myself, if I wanted, I could just sit here in a state of peace and bliss day after day. I wouldn't have to alive, I wouldn't have to do anything and just feel good for the rest of my life. But then I'd be missing out on life also at the same time. I don't know, do I want peace or do I want excitement? It's like I've got one aspect of me that wants to be in a state of peace, and another aspect of me that wants excitement, or maybe excitement and peace. So I'm not sure how I'm supposed to reconcile those. I wonder what certain enlightened spiritual masters would say about that. You want both? Yeah. Yeah, I think I want both ultimately too. Well, I mean, I guess I must, yeah, because I'm multifaceted like everyone is. I'm just concerned that, I don't know, that if I go for excitement too much, I might end up hurting myself unnecessarily. And yet then I'd be, I guess, arguably missing out on life. I don't know. Anyway, let's continue. Maybe Seth will have some answers. Session 625, November 1st, 1972, 9:03 p.m., Wednesday. Jane's delivery was leisurely and quiet as the session began. Now, good evening. Good evening, Seth. Dictation. The body reacts not so much to physical sound as to the interior sounds into which the physical sounds are translated. As mentioned, parentheses, in the last two sessions, it also reacts to sounds that have no physical quote-unquote counterparts. There are certain properties within the structure of the chromosomes that must be activated by specific internal sound values. If this activation does not take place, then the quote-unquote attributes latent within the chromosomes remain so. There are chains of influence that are actually composed of inner values of sound that thread together, as it were, the complicated interweavings of both the genes and chromosomes. I am taking this slowly to explain it as simply as possible. Parentheses, yes. See the definitions of genes and chromosomes in the 610th session in Chapter 1. These sound values are literally interwoven in an electromagnetic pattern. The sounds weave, parentheses, gesturing, themselves through and help form this pattern. The activity of cells within the body also causes what you might call minute explosions of interior sound. Long pause. The electromagnetic and inner sound patterns are impinged upon by certain kinds of light. Together, these all form the prototype upon which and out of which the physical body is formed. Now, When you create a mental image in your mind, it is composed of the same properties just mentioned. A mental image then is also a pattern of internal sound with electromagnetic properties imbued with certain light values. In a sense, and a very real one, the mental image is incipient matter, and any structure so composed, combining the electromagnetic sound and light values, will automatically try to reproduce itself in physical existence or materialization. Long pause. There is a definite connection, then, with the nature of such images and the way in which your body itself is composed. Pause at 925. Electrons, atoms, and molecules all have their independent interior sound and light values. Footnote. There is a steady progression in complexity involving the three. Electrons are negatively charged particles circling a nucleus on which there are an equal number of positive charges. Together these make up an atom. Groups of atoms combined form molecules. End of footnote. There are definite sounds produced when messages leap from your nerve ends. Footnote. Seth tells us in chapter 19 of Seth Speaks, quote, molecular structures send out their own messages, and unless you are tuned in to perceive them, they may be interpreted as meaningless noise. End quote. End of footnote. It is very difficult to explain some of this, but there is quote unquote invisible light then and inaudible sound that affects your body and helps form the pattern about which it constantly emerges. The body is obviously continually created during your present lifetime, in your terms. It is not a mechanism once created, then left to fend for itself. You were not given a certain amount of quote-unquote life force at birth that you use up as you go along, contrary to many schools of thought. 928. The atoms and molecules within you are quite literally dying and being completely replaced all the time. You are being created physically each instant, period. The body reacts to exterior sounds and to the stimuli brought to it by the physical senses. These patterns of reaction can be clearly shown. They are all that is presently observable, however, of far greater interactions that also occur. The atoms and molecules that compose your cells and your flesh, for instance, do not react to the physical sounds that you hear or to the light patterns that your physical eyes perceive. In times of danger, your entire body must be able to move swiftly. The hormonal system must react with great rapidity, sometimes completely changing the balance of a moment earlier. The muscles must be immediately alert, and the entire body flexible enough to respond as a whole. This includes every organ and the most minute portion. Say you are in the middle of a street and suddenly a car is about to hit you. It has come seemingly from nowhere. The cells that compose your intestines, your heart, your muscles obviously do not see the car as quote-unquote you do. Yet the whole system must be instantly activated, and the data that quote-unquote you perceive must be translated in terms that will energize every portion of your body. This is done by translating exterior stimuli into interior stimuli, but the physical carriers of the data are all that scientists or physicians have been able to follow thus far. The greater interactions have not been perceived, and the true story of the decoding of such messages, parentheses, much louder abruptly, has not been understood. And take your break. 940. Jane's trance had developed into quite a profound one, but typically she was soon out of it. Wow, he's going to town tonight, she exclaimed. He gave me a break now only because he's going into something more, and he doesn't want to interrupt it. I couldn't tell you what that was about, and yet I have an idea. I think Seth wishes I had a better vocabulary for body things. Resume in the same manner at 957. Tantric sex. Surprisingly, I don't actually know what that is, but I can kind of imagine what it might be. I should look that up sometime. Now, pause. The nerves are also composed of the same kind of interior structures as mentioned earlier in this chapter, around or rather from which the physical nerves form. Here, the exterior data is translated and broken down into inner terms. That is, it is decoded in terms of the internal sound, light, and electromagnetic patterns discussed before. It then becomes usable information, even in terms of the atoms and molecules that compose the cells. The physical lapse that occurs between an incoming message, pause, frowning, and its intended destination does not occur on these other levels. The quote-unquote interior message gets to its destination ahead of the physical one. By the time the organism responds, the inner patterns have already reacted, and this must and always does precede any physical response to stimuli. Therefore, the invisible body pattern, composed of its interior light, sound, and electromagnetic properties, reacts first, and actually initiates the later physical response. Slowly. There is always this translation of exterior stimuli. The perceived lapse noted by scientists is, of course, the physical one. Parentheses, leaning forward, hand to closed eyes. Caused by the quote-unquote time it takes the message to leap the nerve endings. Footnote. Here Seth refers to the way the nervous impulse passes from one neuron, or nerve cell, to the next as it traverses the body's nervous system. The junction between two neurons is called the synapse. End of footnote. The interior translation, however, is simultaneous. Now return in your mind to the situation of the near accident. That event with the car, its driver, and your own precarious position exists as another structure beside the one that you physically see. It also, the event, exists in the terms mentioned earlier, in a reality composed of invisible light, inaudible sound, and electromagnetic patterns. Consciously, you react to the physical data, the noise, the squeal of brakes perhaps, the visual shock of seeing the car so close, but the entire inner reality of that scene or event is instantly quote-unquote recognized by what I refer to as your inner senses. Parentheses, see the note at the end of the session. These respond to the interior patterns I told you about. The physical data is carried through the nerves with the necessary time lapses that must occur. These represent the temporal end of the spectrum of perception. Because you are flesh and blood creatures, the interior aspects of perception must have their physical counterparts, but material awareness and bodily response to it would be impossible were it not for these internal webworks. Now, before you see anything physically, you do so through these inner pathways. The interior perception activates the outside one. When you experience physical motion or activity, events or phenomena, you are becoming aware of the tail end of a long quote-unquote series of interior comprehensions. I am saying that all exterior events, including your own bodies with their insides, all objects, all physical materializations, are the outside structures of inside ones that are composed of interior sound and invisible light, interwoven in electromagnetic patterns. It's kind of crazy how, seemingly complex some of the stuff can get as Seth tries to describe the very fabric of reality with the verbal equivalent, with our English language that is maybe not exactly necessarily designed to describe such things. 1028. Beneath temporal perception, then, each object and event exists in these terms, in patterns that interact with each other. On a physical level, you seem to be separated from everything that is not yourself. This is not true, but in your day-to-day existence it seems to be, and it is an assumption that you usually take for granted. Pause. On the interior level of which I have been speaking, all happenings and objects are connected. A movement or change in one affects others. You will physically respond to and recognize some of this alteration, as in the example of the near accident. But whether or not you are consciously aware of such activity, it changes the interior environment of your body through these inner pathways. Your own thoughts and beliefs, having the same kind of inner reality, also transform the interior environments of others. The near accident mentioned was a physical event, but it was initially a mental one. It existed in this non-temporal reality then before, in your terms, it was physically materialized, perceived, and reacted to. It was propelled from inner reality to outward reality through belief, emotion, and imagination. Because you cannot see them, it may seem to you that these qualities are not as real, say, as an object. Physically, you can only see the results of an emotion, for instance. You cannot hold it in your hands as you can a stone. Ideas represent your psychic intent. They generate emotion and imagination. These activate the interior patterns. They are the motive force of action, pause, the means by which all interior events are exteriorized. They are energy formed and directed, formulations of interior and exterior patterns of reality. They are a part of the creative force from which all realities spring. Again, we run into difficulties in explanation simply because there are few verbal equivalents for what I am trying to say. Deliberately. Imagination and emotions are the most concentrated forms of energy that you possess as physical creatures. Any strong emotion carries within it far more energy than, say, that required to send a rocket to the moon. Very forcefully. Emotions, instead of propelling a physical rocket, for example, send thoughts from this interior reality through the barrier between non-physical and physical into the quote-unquote objective world, no small feat, and one that is constantly repeated. That's very interesting. Seth is talking about the idea of manifestation there. You may take a break. 1047. Boy, I'm telling you, I was out that time. I really was, Jane said. The house could have fallen down, I think. I had that thing again where you're in it so deep that you're a part of it. The feeling where you're in the guts of things. It's a real weird kind of inner focus. There's a great kind of fulfilling sense of triumph in doing it, like you're pulling stuff out of the secret nature of things. I can't say where you go or what you do. After all this time, I'm still amazed that, brackets, this book, comes out all finished, she said. Usually I don't want anybody else around for this. You cut out everything else. Other people would cause you to pick up on them or be distracting. End quote. Seth had something to say about this last thought not long ago. The following quotes are extracted from some deleted material. Quote, generally speaking, it is better if book dictation is done alone, or with those with whom you are well acquainted and easy. This is simply because there are less psychic distractions, and it is easier for Rupert to focus into one clear channel. The needs and desires of others naturally enter in, Seth continued, and some energy must be used to close them out. The more interested and excited, brackets, witnesses, are, of course, the more their own concerns ring out. It is difficult for Rupert to block out these additional psychic distractions. With strangers, the sessions are often personal, however. Told us about 9 of these so far, and a list of them can be found in chapter 19 of the Seth material. There are more to come, too. This break, it developed, marked the end of book dictation. Seth returned with other material, though, and the session lasted until 11:45 p.m. Okay, so that concludes that session. So we will take a brief break and then continue. And yet again, my heater needs to turn down. It's not that it's oh so warm in here right now, it's more of a concern that it's going to get very warm in here if I'm not proactive about it. All right. So let's see, we're a little blurry. Let me fix that real quick. Jeez, I hope we're not lagging. What I'm seeing on my screen right now is extremely laggy. Very strange. Let's see, does it still look weird on my end? I think it's stabilizing. Okay, let's see here. So I'll check one more thing and then we'll continue. Okay. My computer is like going really slow for some reason. No, well, whatever. There's no challenge that I can't fix. Session 626, November 8th, 1972, 9:06 p.m. Wednesday. No session was held last Monday evening. Yesterday, Jane and I read the Time magazine cover story for November 13th, 1972, featuring Richard Bach in his book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. We were very pleased for Dick. The article also included information about the Seth material. See the 618th session in Chapter 3 for an account of Seth's meeting with Dick and the latter's editor information. She wrote Dick about it and told others. Her dream was also fairly accurate concerning the magazine's cover painting for the piece. A montage featuring, quote, a bird that was somehow a part of a man's head or face, as she described it. Actually, Time's design showed a seagull superimposed over Dick Bach's head, partially obliterating it. Monday night, Jane had another vivid dream involving the Seth material, herself and a certain kind of magazine story. She's written it down, and we'll see how it turns out. Good evening. Good evening, Seth. Dictation. Pause, then humorously. And aside to you. Now, you see, I can speak in time or out of it. Underline, quote-unquote, time. Yes. So there is Seth noting with time with a capital T, quote, I can speak in time or out of it. Very amusing. Looks like we're lagging again. I'm going to check on the quality of the stream real quick. One moment, please, dear viewers. So it keeps lagging like that. I want to make sure that it's not problematic. It's not problematic. Okay, so I'm moving around now. Okay, so I'm moving around now. Okay, it seems like we're good to go. Yeah, I don't know why it looked like that for a bit, but anyway. As long as this is getting recorded, that's all that really matters, and broadcasting now, of course. Let us resume. Now you see I can speak in time or out of it, underline time. Parentheses, quote, yes. The physically alive body, its activities and condition are directed through the beliefs of the conscious mind. The body, as explained in this chapter, also has, quote-unquote, invisible counterparts composed of the electromagnetic properties and the interior sound and light qualities. These invisible structures preceded the emergence of the physical body. They also exist after the body's death. While the condition of the body is directed by the conscious mind in life, then, the idea or mental pattern for the body existed before the conscious mind's connection with the physical brain. The genes and chromosomes do not just happen to have within them the precisely definite coded information that will be needed. The data is impressed upon them from within. The identity exists before the form. You could say that the identity, existing in another dimension entirely, plants the seed into the medium of physical reality from which its own material existence will spring. Therefore, the inner self forms, first, the quote-unquote invisible body structure, which will quote-unquote later emerge into flesh, or emerge in flesh. At the event of this mental seeding, the conscious mind, in your terms, is obviously not connected with the brain, which has not yet been formed in flesh. The idea of the body is held and made physical by a conscious mind. New paragraph. Consciousness then is not dependent upon physical perception, though this attribute does require an awareness immersed within a material form. While physical consciousness is sifted through the bodily apparatus, you are usually unaware of non-corporeal kinds because of that process. The general framework, properties, and characteristics of the body exist, therefore, before its formation. In simple terms, you choose ahead of time the kind of body you will inhabit and impress. It may seem to you that you do not have any conscious control over your body's condition in life as you know it, much less before your birth. You have been taught that there is little connection between your thought and your body's activities. 929. A man believing he has heart trouble will finally, through his own anxiety, affect the functioning of his quote-unquote involuntary system until his heart is definitely harmed if the belief goes unchecked. The conscious mind directs the so-called involuntary systems of the body, and not the other way around. No idea slips insidiously past your awareness to affect your involuntary system unless it fits in with your own conscious beliefs. Once more, you will not be sick if you think you are well, but there may be other ideas that make you believe in the necessity for poor health. You are not aware of how the body performs its many involuntary functions. The conscious mind could not handle all that data, but those functions perfectly mirror your consciously held ideas and beliefs. As I also mentioned in the 614th session in Chapter 2, the conscious mind is not basically cut off from the inner self or from those deep inner sources of knowledge available to it. The aware mind is not any one event, for that matter. It represents various portions of the inner self that quote-unquote surface at any given time. Within the basic framework of the body chosen before physical birth, parentheses, for reasons that will be discussed later, the individual has full freedom to create a perfectly healthy functioning form. The form is, however, a mirror of beliefs and will accurately materialize in flesh those ideas held by the conscious mind. Parentheses. Jane's delivery was very serious and somewhat loud. She leaned forward and tapped upon the coffee table between us, her eyes wide and dark. That is one of the body's primary functions. A sick body is performing that function then, in its way, as well as a healthy one. It is your most intimate feedback system, changing with your thought and experience, giving you in flesh the physical counterpart of your thought. So it is futile to become angry at a symptom, or to deride the body for its condition when it is presenting you with a corporeal replica of your own thought, as it was meant to do. Let me say that again so it sinks in. It is futile to become angry at a symptom or to deride the body for its condition when it is presenting you with the corporeal replica of your own thought, as it was meant to do. Your environment and your experience in the physical world also provide you with the same kind of feedback. It is just as useless to berate your environment or your experience in it as it is to deride your body for the same reasons. It often seems, when such ideas as these are presented, that the ideal results in your terms would be perfection, quote-unquote heaven on earth, a state in which everyone would be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Parentheses. Now Seth asked me to open a beer for Jane. Quote, I don't want to give him a break yet, he added, the him stemming from Jane's male entity name, Rupert. It was obvious that Jane was in a very deep trance. Our house was turning noisy, but she showed no signs whatever of unease. Instead, she sat quietly waiting for me to pick up my notebook. End of parentheses. You are, however, in physical existence using your body as a medium for learning and expression. You are each unique. Pause. Many of you, for your own reasons, pursue courses that do not involve an even development of abilities, an overall balanced picture, for example, but choose to express and experiment with certain qualities to the exclusion of others. Such a course would not, in physical reality, present you with anything like a balanced picture of perfection. 950. Later in the book, we will discuss other kinds of existence in which you are also involved, and these to some extent color your intents and purposes in physical life as you now understand it. If all of your beliefs, not just your quote-unquote fortunate ones, were not materialized, you would never thoroughly understand on a physical level that your ideas create reality. If only your quote-unquote positive beliefs were materialized, then you would never clearly comprehend the power of your thought, for you would not completely experience its physical results. The conscious mind exists before material life and after it. In corporeal existence, it is intertwined with the brain, and during physical life, your earthly perceptions, your precise and steady focus within your particular space and time system, are dependent upon that fine alliance. Pause. Before physical birth, then, you will form a mental concept of the body you will have. This image is impressed into matter in this way. You tune yourself into a highly specific dimension of reality. You form a physical structure that will have existence within that intensely concentrated area, that will have validity and actuality, that will come alive within those quote-unquote frequencies, very positively. Now, it is here that the seeming division in the self occurs, for in physical life, the conscious mind must be connected with the brain, and in terms of time, that organ itself must grow and develop. So all of your consciousness cannot be physically aware. The portion that must quote-unquote wait for the brain's development is the part you call in life, quote-unquote, the conscious mind. The other portions can be called the inner self. Now, all of this inner self cannot become expressed even with its connection with the brain, since the brain must sift perception through the physical apparatus. You may take a break. Because of the noise distractions in the house, I kept Rupert in trance longer. It is easier that way. 10:06. Jane's hour-long trance had indeed developed into a profound one. Man, have I been out, she said, trying to keep her eyes open. She finally gave up and leaned back in her rocker. Are you tired of writing? I said I wasn't. Well, I guess we'll go on then, she said. She took her glasses off. Seth returned in a few moments. As soon as he did, Jane's eyes came wide open, and her manner grew animated and intense once more. Resume at 10:10. The brain with its bodily connections must deal with the time lapses that sensual perception always imply. The interior workings of the body, to be conscious, would have to deal with time sequences that would present the physically attuned consciousness with quote-unquote mathematical deductions and calculations far too numerous for it to handle. For example, it would have to keep cautious track of all the muscles, nerves, organs, cells, molecules, and atoms, while manipulating the body in space and time. Therefore, a seeming division occurs in which a portion of the invisible conscious mind is connected with the physical brain, and a portion of it is free of that connection. That brackets latter part forms what you think of as the involuntary system of the body. Again, it is important that you realize the initial non-physical reaction to stimuli that sparks off all physical reactions. There is constant interplay and communication between the areas of consciousness that are connected to the brain and those that are not. The quote-unquote deeper purposes of the consciousness involved quote-unquote circulate, sometimes arising in the awareness that is joined with the brain. Information coming from those deeper sources of the self, reaching the areas connected to the brain, will be interpreted according to the beliefs of that most physically focused segment of the self. To some degree, such inner data will be colored by the current beliefs of that part of the self, most directly confronting the physical world. Those beliefs, however, are also constantly being examined by the inner self. And now I suggest that you end the session. All right, I said in some surprise, but we have a good portion of the material through, so, smiling, count your blessings. And at 10:27 p.m., Jane slowly emerged from a deeply dissociated state. The rather abrupt end of the session came, she finally said, just because she had been tiring. This proved to be the end of Chapter 5. All right, next up is Chapter 6, entitled The Body of Your Beliefs and the Power Structures of Beliefs. So we will take a brief break and resume shortly. The phone's at 93%, so it's almost fully charged. I would take shorter breaks, but quite frankly, my voice needs to rest from time to time. But we'll resume here in about 30 seconds. Okay, so Chapter 6, The Body of Your Beliefs and the Power Structures of Beliefs. Session 627, November 13th, 1972, 9:21 p.m. Monday. Over the last few days, Jane has received a number of telephone calls, as well as letters, from people about the country, asking for help from her and or Seth. Some of the problems cited are quite severe, and often they're beyond any reasonable (brackets let alone quick) therapy that Jane, Seth, or I can offer. Because of our own sympathetic reactions, Jane and I often end up feeling frustrated. Also, to help but a few people with any thoroughness means that we'd have no time left for the rest. Apropos of Jane's efforts to personally do what she can, she received a visitor recently who displayed signs of a secondary personality. As we waited for the session tonight, Jane said 2 channels from Seth were open. Seth could speak on the people who have been seeking her out or give book dictation. She chose to continue with the book, saying that it will help numbers of people far beyond anything she can do individually. Good evening. Good evening, Seth. Dictation, Chapter 6. The body of your beliefs and the power structures of beliefs. This is the heading. Quite literally, you live in the body of your beliefs. You perceive through the body of your beliefs. Your beliefs can increase your vision or diminish it. They can increase or diminish your hearing or any sense function. If, for example, you believe that after a certain time of life hearing will fade, then so it will. You will begin to use the faculty less and less, unconsciously transfer your attention to the other senses to compensate, and rely less and less upon your ears until the functions themselves do atrophy, period. Functions in this particular regard are habits. You simply forget how to hear properly following your belief. All of the minute manipulations necessary to hearing are unconsciously repressed. The actual physical deterioration then does indeed follow. The deterioration, however, does not occur first, but after. The same kind of development can occur in almost any physical category. Usually more than one belief is involved. Parallel with the belief that vision will fail, you may have the before-mentioned belief that hearing will dim, and these 2 ideas may be reinforced by a belief that age automatically makes you less a person, turning you into an individual who can no longer relate in the daily pattern of environment. The belief, you see, would work to ensure the materialization of that state. Pause. On the other hand, you may believe that wisdom grows with age, that self-understanding brings a peace of mind not earlier known, that the keen mind is actually far better able to assess the environment, and that the physical senses are much more appreciative of all stimuli. And so those conditions will be physically met in your experience. The physical apparatus itself, following your beliefs, will continue in health. You must understand again that your ideas and thoughts do not exist as phantoms or shadow images without substance. They are electromagnetic realities. They affect your physical being, and they are automatically translated by your nervous system into the stuff of your flesh and of your experience. 936. Your conscious mind is meant to assess and evaluate physical reality, and to help you chart your course in the corporeal universe of which you are presently part. Other portions of your being, as mentioned in the last session, for example, rely upon you to do this. All energy at the inner self's disposal is then concentrated to bring about the results asked for by the conscious mind. Your effective power of action follows the lines of your beliefs. To believe in your own weakness is to deny yourself the power of action. To accept uncritically all beliefs that come to you is to open yourself to a barrage of conflicting data at best, in which the clear lines of action and power become blurred. Contradictory demands and assessments are then sent into the inner self, which by various methods will try to tell you that something is wrong. Beliefs of like nature attract each other, for you are bound to look for consistencies in your behavior and experience. So let's focus in on this a bit. This is interesting. So Seth says to accept uncritically all beliefs that come to you is to open yourself to a barrage of conflicting data at best, in which the clear lines of action and power become blurred. Contradictory demands and assessments are then sent into the inner self, which by various methods will try to tell you that something is wrong. So it almost seems like then it can be particularly challenging if we open ourselves up to a lot of different kinds of information at once. Like a lot of people say, oh, it's a good idea to like hear what everyone has to say and what all different perspectives on something are, but like maybe that's true, but at the same time, like based on what Seth is saying here, The idea seems to be you still have to decide what you believe. Like, you can't just take it all in as truth. You have to be critical of the information coming into your conscious mind and decide what you believe and what you don't believe. Pause. You must learn to deal with your own beliefs directly, or you will be forced to deal with them indirectly by reacting to them quite without knowing it in your physical experience. When you rail against an unfavorable environment or a situation or condition, basically, and underline the following phrase, you are not acting independently, but almost blindly reacting. You are reacting to events that seem to happen to you, and always in response to a situation. To act in an independent manner, you must begin to initiate action that you want to occur physically, emphatically, by creating it in your own being. This is done by combining belief, emotion, and imagination, and forming them into a mental picture of the desired physical result. Of course, the wanted result is not yet physical, or you would not need to create it, so it does no good to say that your physical experience seems to contradict what you are trying to do. Pause. Because ideas and beliefs have this electromagnetic reality, then constant interplays between those strongly contradictory beliefs can cause great power blocks, impeding the flow of inner energy outward. At times, a polarization can occur. Unassimilated beliefs, unexamined ideas, can seem to adopt a life of their own. These can effectively dominate certain areas of activity. You may take your break. I'm just going to take a very brief break here. Apply some of this stuff. Okay. 9:50 to 10:10. Now, dictation. Not long ago, Rupert was presented with a demonstration embodying the nature and power of beliefs. He received a phone call from a man who lived in another state. There was a request for an interview. Without knowing why, Rupert felt an impulse to see the man and set up an appointment. The visitor arrived from the airport with his wife in tow. He was a study, a living example of the effects of conflicting, unexamined beliefs, a fierce and yet agonized personification of what can happen when an individual allows his conscious mind to deny its responsibilities, i.e., when an individual becomes afraid of his own consciousness. Here was a young man whose beliefs were alive with their own life while he was relatively powerless. No effort had been made to reconcile directly opposing beliefs until the personality itself was quite literally polarized. 10:20. You were faced with what could be called a classic instance of secondary personality. I am discussing it here because it so beautifully illustrates the nature and power of beliefs and the conflicts that can arise when an individual does not accept responsibility for his own thoughts. This is not a usual case, but to some extent or another, such a division occurs physically or mentally when the contents of the conscious mind are not examined. Entering, the man bristled with belligerence and hostility. Having requested help, he then hated himself for the weakness that he believed caused such a need. He glowered at our friend Rupert with great vehemency, projecting all of the energy at his command to show that he would not be cowed, and that if anyone took over the situation, he would be the one to do so. He spoke of another personality far more powerful than he, though, he said, he could force a roomful of 150 people to follow his commands. The other personality, however, originated in another galaxy and came as a friend to help and protect him. At his behest, brackets, he said, this invisible friend killed a lawyer. The lawyer not only did not understand the condition, according to the story, but hurt the feelings of the man under discussion. We will call the man Augustus. Take a break for Rupert. 10:30. Jane had begun coughing intermittently after last break. Now she coughed so steadily that Seth interrupted the delivery, which is a pretty rare occurrence. While Jane rested, I suggested that if Seth returned, it would be better if he discussed the reasons behind her coughing. This was done. Surprisingly, the material received ran to several pages. The session ended at 11:43 p.m. All right, that's the end of that session. We'll take just another very brief break and then continue with a very fascinating story here, I must say, what Seth is about to get into, what he just began getting into with this Augustus character. This stuff is extremely interesting, to me at least. Let's see, I don't know if I need to turn my heater down again or not. I think we're good to go. I'll be right back though. Okay, so let us continue with the next session. Session 628, November 15th, 1972, 9:29 p.m., Wednesday. In Monday's session, Seth had started a discussion of Jane's recent visitor, Augustus, who had shown definite signs of a subordinate or secondary personality. As we sat for tonight's session, Jane said, "I know what Seth's going to call Augustus's other personality, Augustus 2. We were amused, thinking of Seth and Seth 2. Footnote. For more extensive material on Seth 2, see Chapter 17 of the Seth material and Chapter 22 of Seth Speaks. In the latter, Seth tells us, Seth 2 stands relatively in the same position to me as I stand to the woman, brackets, Jane, through whom I am now speaking." End of footnote. Get a little more comfortable here. Now, Jane began speaking slowly in trance. Good evening, Seth. And we will resume dictation. To begin with, Augustus was brought up to believe that the inner self was dangerous, that individuals reacted because of inner conflicts over which they had little conscious control. Gesturing. He believed that the individual personality was relatively powerless to understand itself, and that it stood precariously alone and undefended, with a chasm of evil beneath and with an unattainable, cold, just but not compassionate good, with a capital G, above. He felt bewildered in a world of opposites. Conflicting beliefs were uncritically accepted. Pause. The conscious mind will always attempt to make sense out of its beliefs, to form them into patterns and sequences. It will usually organize ideas in as rational a way as possible, and dispense with those that seem to contradict the overall system of its beliefs. Augustus had been taught to fear his own thoughts, to avoid self-examination. Beliefs or ideas that frightened him were not faced, therefore, but initially shoved into corners of the conscious mind, where they lay relatively harmless in the beginning. As time went on, the number of unexamined, frightening beliefs began to accumulate. Ideas and beliefs do feed upon themselves. There is within them a built-in impetus toward growth, development, and fulfillment. Over the years, two opposing systems of beliefs built up strongly, vying for Augustus's attention. He believed that he was utterly powerless as an individual, that despite all his efforts, he would come to nothing, go unnoticed. He felt completely unloved. He did not feel worthy of love. At the same time, he let his conscious mind wander, and to compensate, saw himself as all-powerful, contemptuous of his fellow human beings, and able to work greater vengeance upon them for their misunderstanding of him. In this line of beliefs, he was able to do anything, cure mankind's ills if he chose, or withhold such knowledge from the world to punish it. Period. Now, all of these ideas were quite conscious, but he held each group separately. The conscious mind, again, tries to obtain overall integrity and unity, lining up its beliefs into some kind of consistent system. When opposing beliefs that directly contradict each other are held for any length of time, and little attempt is made to reconcile them, then a quote-unquote battle begins within the conscious mind itself. Pause at 950. Since it is the beliefs of the conscious mind that regulate the involuntary bodily motions in the entire physical system, then contradictory beliefs obviously set up adverse physical reactions and imbalances. Before Augustus's opposing beliefs lined themselves up into separate camps, so to speak, the body was in continual turmoil. Contradictory messages were constantly sent to the muscular system and the heart. The hormonal system teetered. Even his physical temperature varied rather drastically. Because like ideas do attract like, both electromagnetically and emotionally, the conscious mind found itself with two complete contradictory systems of belief and two self-images. Pause. To protect the integrity of the physical structure, Augustus's conscious mind neatly divided itself up. No longer were the minute-to-minute messages to the body scrambled. Slowly, the part of Augustus who felt powerful and alien became personified. When Augustus felt threatened, then the conscious mind switched over, accepting as operating procedure the system of beliefs in which Augustus saw himself as all-powerful, secure, but as alien. This part of his beliefs, therefore, in this particular self-image, took over his conscious mind and became what we will here call Augustus II. When Augustus II assumed leadership, then the physical body itself was not only strong and powerful, but capable of physical feats far surpassing those of Augustus I. 1001. Augustus II, you see, believes that his body is nearly invincible, and following this belief, the body does perform much better. Augustus II believes that he is an alien. In this case, the rationale, because there must be one, is that he is a being from another planet, in fact, from another galaxy. His purpose in this case is quite clear and simple. He is to help Augustus I, to use his power on the latter's behalf, rewarding his friends and terrifying his enemies. Augustus I quite deeply believes he needs this kind of help. Now, this is a split of the conscious mind. It does not originate within the inner self. When Augustus II takes over, he is quite conscious. He simply views physical reality through an undeviating system of beliefs. The messages sent to the body are not in the least contradictory. The body is under excellent control. Augustus I's moods, of course, were a direct result of the ideas he was entertaining. It was this unceasing swing from high states of exaltation and power to low ones of powerlessness and depression that the body could not tolerate, because of the vast alterations entailed. For the greater periods of time, Augustus I predominates, since his ideas of worthlessness, in your terms, were adopted earlier, and worse, are only reinforced by the contrast between him and Augustus II. Augustus II comes on sometimes for as long as a week at a time. He does all the things and says all the things that Augustus I would dearly love to do and say, with only certain safeguards. Augustus I, however, is not literally unconscious during this time, but quite aware of the quote-unquote vicarious activities and fulfillments. Again, it is a game of hide and seek, in which the so-called unconscious mind is relatively innocent. Augustus II can therefore rant and rave, lie and cheat, assert himself, show his contempt for his fellows, and absolve Augustus I of any responsibility. You may take your break and we will continue. 1019 to 1030. So, I'll just mention here very briefly, since we're having a break. It's interesting what Seth is describing here, because this could also be looked at as the result of someone who is not being authentic, who is not acting with integrity, who is not in their integrity, and who is so divided within, who has so many splits in their consciousness that they do literally develop what is basically a secondary personality. You know, their personality itself splits, essentially. So it's interesting because Seth is looking at it in the context of beliefs and how conflicting beliefs are what are problematic here, and I absolutely agree with him. I'm just saying it's also interesting to note that with those conflicting beliefs come conflicting, divided aspects of oneself, resulting from a division, really many, many, many divisions in their consciousness. And what is the result of that? Basically, trauma is what I'm saying. And Seth even mentions in this how this Augustus character very much believed that he was not loved and that he was not worthy of love. And also saw himself as weak and powerless, and so to compensate, he sort of invented this all-powerful Augustus II character. So it's really very tragic in a way, and it's like really we would want to look at someone like this and anyone else who has these issues with sympathy and with compassion, because even as he's being all belligerent and everything, like saying to Jane that, oh, if anyone's going to control the situation, it's going to be him, and being all angry and forceful and unfriendly and whatnot. The issue at the end of the day, though, is that all of that came from his originally just trying to get his power back. All of that came from his deep, deep feelings of victimization, of powerlessness, of trauma, and feeling like he couldn't do anything to get out of that other than, well, to basically turn to anger and hatred and inventing this other character that he would personify from time to time that was all powerful. So it's really very sad, and even though we might be tempted to look at someone like that as, ooh, I don't want to have anything to do with that person, ooh, I want to stay away from them, whatever. The reality is we should be looking at that with sympathy and compassion, because that could happen to anyone, theoretically. It could happen to you, even, I would say to people. I mean, if you know what you're doing with your beliefs and whatnot, it's highly unlikely to happen to you, but if you don't know what you're doing, it could happen to you. Who knows, maybe some people end up watching this to whom it has happened, or something like that has happened. And if so, again, we're all reflections of each other. There is no us versus them. There is no avoiding one person just because they seem to be screwed up or whatever, and then you being healthy in the process. No. You have to take everyone as an aspect of yourself, as a part of yourself, if you truly want to be healthy. It's very difficult to explain precisely what I'm meaning here, but doing the best I can. That would be it, generally speaking. All right, so give me just a moment, and then we will continue. Oh, my phone is fully charged. Good. Come on, YouTube, hurry the hell up so I can resume. Okay. So let us continue. 1019 to 1030. Now, there is nothing evil in the nature of Augustus II. In spiritualistic circles, however, he would most certainly be interpreted as an evil spirit or guide. His nature is protective. The basic ideas and beliefs that have been personified into his being, that became his being, were formed to protect Augustus I from the destructive ideas given to him in his childhood. I guess it looks like there's a period there where there's not supposed to be. So I think what it's really supposed to say is, were formed to protect Augustus I from the destructive ideas given to him in his childhood to combat the beliefs in powerlessness and futility. To that degree, they were added on to the original ideas, but still at an early age, so it was from the child's concept of a powerful being that Augustus too sprang. The greater the feelings of weakness, then, the greater the compensating feelings of power and strength, but again with no attempt at conscious reconciliation. Pause. Augustus's mother noted only that her son seemed highly changeable. Augustus, too, did not present himself as obviously, quote-unquote, another personality until after Augustus's marriage, when the demands of fatherhood and making a living were placed upon him. He could not cope. His beliefs in his unworthiness prevented him from using his abilities, or even pursuing a course of effective action with any persistence. It was then that Augustus, too, began to assert himself, and to Augustus's wife. In his own way, Augustus, too, would have proved to her that she was married to quite an unusual, powerful man, a paragon of virility and strength, but to do so, Augustus I must appear as Augustus II to her. This continued for some time. Augustus I would first develop a splitting headache, and then this alien from outer space would arrive, the commanding male that Augustus I was not. Pause. Here, however, the quote-unquote deception brought about certain difficulties. Not only was Augustus II more sexually promiscuous, but by contrast, Augustus I seemed very pallid indeed. Augustus II was originally intended to help Augustus I. It's true that the exotic conditions spilled over, casting some glamour on Augustus I when Augustus II left for a time, but the contrast was too blatant, too out in the open. Augustus I, still the primary personality, became even more frightened. He knew that gradually Augustus II was outliving his purpose, showing him up, and had to go. 1046. In fact, once Augustus II obviously quote-unquote took over the body of Augustus I, it was all out in the open in the family. The wife began to take notes of what was done and said. When these events were repeated to Augustus I later, the lying and cheating was evident. So was the infantile nature of the quote-unquote personality. Yet Augustus II purported to be all-wise, from a galaxy far surpassing Earth in every category of endeavor. And here he was making predictions that never happened, and boasting and lying like a trooper. The beliefs whose energy generated this quote-unquote alternate self-image then appeared in the daylight, acting out their natural results in physical reality. Augustus I, now in manhood, was forced to perceive the nature of these beliefs to some extent, yet when he was here visiting Rupert, he still would not examine them. Augustus II has not taken over now for 2.5 months. Augustus is in a dilemma, for he still holds intact the beliefs in his own powerlessness, and the contradictory beliefs of omnipotence are not now being expressed through Augustus II, yet expressed they will be, and so in the interview Augustus I, who we will now simply call Augustus, at one moment came through with his gigantic belligerence, staring at Rupert and telling him that he could annihilate anyone who hurt him. In the next moment, the great plea for help would surface, the love of his wife and child. In one sentence, Augustus would make a statement, and 10 minutes later make it clear with another remark that the first fact had not been true. Here, the polarity between Augustus I and II had dissolved, so that the two opposing systems of belief operated alongside each other. Still, Augustus would not examine his own words, his own thoughts, or see the contradictions so obvious to others. The nature and importance of belief appeared so eloquently that Rupert was astounded, and found himself forced into some complicated psychological footwork. The two quote-unquote personalities were no longer separate, but merging. So interesting that we literally just talked about this past Saturday the Temperance or Art card in Tarot, which is all about the reconciliation of polarities, basically, and the art of alchemy. And one of the things that we discovered together in that stream is that that also likely applies to beliefs, the reconciliation of conflicting or opposing beliefs. And now here Seth is talking about it now here on Monday, in our Seth stream. So very interesting synchronicity there. Pause at 11 o'clock. Augustus said, "My friend killed a neighbor of mine who was against me giving him pneumonia. He looks out for me." End quote. Another neighbor has ulcers, and Augustus told Rupert that after he touched his neighbor, the ulcers seemed to have been healed. So he said, "I would like to know how much of this great ability belongs to me." And looking briefly away, "Perhaps I do not need my friend to protect me after all." Now this was definitely to the good, in that Augustus was beginning to feel that perhaps he was not powerless. His own personality, however, is left to handle the definitely unsavory characteristics of an Augustus II who is no longer personified. He is left with the questions, if I am so powerful, how is it that I am so weak and cannot even support my family? If I am so great, why cannot I effectively use my energy? For the body of Augustus is once again under the sway of beliefs about himself that are highly contradictory. Before, he was physically powerful when he was Augustus II, and weak when he was Augustus I. Now as Augustus, he is alternately strong and weak, and the body stresses are apparent. As Augustus II, he could stay up night and day and perform physical tasks quite difficult for the normal human being to do, for he operated under the indivisible idea of power and strength. It has taken some courage for him to let Augustus II vanish, because the neat division of beliefs no longer exists. However, he will seem even more difficult to his wife, since the characteristics of Augustus II now quote-unquote bleed into his own. He will lie, for example, where before only Augustus II lied. Here, then, is a case where directly opposing beliefs dominated the conscious mind at various times, each operating the body in its own manner. Physically, the body has the same capacity for strength regardless of which group of ideas were dominant, but practically speaking, Augustus I was incapable of performing the feats of Augustus II. Augustus II once leaped from a second-story window to the ground in anger and without injury, a highly unusual feat. Augustus, however, is so exhausted that he can barely get through a normal day. You had a situation in which an individual, through beliefs, put his power and energy literally beside himself. He could use it only when he switched beliefs completely. It was only because the childlike characteristics of Augustus II finally appeared so blatantly that Augustus II had to be dispensed with. Augustus's wife made the difference, for it was obvious that she did not have the same opinion of this quote-unquote friend that her husband had. Her beliefs then became the new foundation, the one point of change that allowed Augustus to view this alternate self-image with any kind of detachment at all. Humorously, you may take your alternate break. 11:22. Jane remembered nothing of what Seth had said, but as soon as she came out of trance, which was quickly as usual, she told me, "I can tell that Seth's got more on that right there, all ready and waiting. In between sessions, I don't feel aware of that usually, though I dream about it sometimes." End quote. This was the end of bookwork for the evening. After a break, Seth came through with 2 pages about a matter I'd brought up earlier tonight. Thus, the recorded session ended at 11:51 p.m. The session resumed, however, after I put my notebook aside. During a spontaneous exchange, Seth delivered some insights concerning his own origin and creative aspects, and why Jane's personality would make the emergence of a Seth possible. There was more. I didn't write down what was said, and as usual ended up wishing I had. Perhaps we'll take the time to recoup it during a session. I've always found that the material seems to fly away unless it's recorded at once in some fashion. One of the reasons for this, I've often thought, is because Jane isn't the only one who's in a trance during a session. The receiver, brackets myself for instance, is too, in his or her own way. When the connections between Seth and his audience are broken, the material is to some degree quote-unquote left behind in that common meeting area. All right, that's the end of that session. So we will take a brief break and then resume. So we've been streaming for almost 2 hours now. I'm good to go for about another 40 minutes, maybe a bit longer if I need to. So we'll probably just finish chapter 6 and then that'll be it for today. All right, let us resume. Session 629, November 29th, 1972, 9:28 p.m., Wednesday. As usually happens at this time of year, we've begun to miss some regularly scheduled sessions. Jane and I figure that from now on they'll probably be held irregularly into January 1973, partly because of our holiday activities, which we enjoy, but also because this seems to be a natural time of rest for us, although Jane plans to keep her ESP and writing classes going as usual. The first portion of the session is deleted. Seth resumed book dictation on chapter 6 at 9:59. There is no real adequate framework in your society in which people like Augustus can be treated with any effectiveness. An analyst might consider Augustus as schizophrenic and label him neatly, but such terms are basically meaningless. If the analyst, over a period of time, should convince Augustus that his condition in the present resulted from some specific inhibited event in the past, and if the analyst was an intuitive and understanding man, then Augustus might change his beliefs enough so that some kind of quote-unquote cure was worked. He would then conveniently remember such an event and display the expected emotions as he re-experienced it. Unfortunately, in his present state, powerless as it were without Augustus too, he might also simply call on his alter ego to show the good doctor that he was no one to trifle with. Hang on a second. Okay. Then there would be the matter of helping Augustus to face the implications of his other self's behavior in such a way that he could accept it as a portion of his whole identity. When Augustus too was in control of the body, the chemical makeup varied considerably. It showed significant differences over Augustus's usual hormonal status. The chemical changes were caused by the transition in beliefs that operated, and not the other way around. Pause at 10:08. See the material on hormones and beliefs in the 621st session in chapter 4. If chemical alteration were made in Augustus II, he would return to the Augustus I personality, but the change would be artificial, not permanent, and possibly quite dangerous. The chemically inhibited tendencies would to some extent be forcefully blanketed through medication. The problem would remain, though, and it is quite possible that overt suicidal tendencies could result, or more insidious hidden suicidal inclinations, where vital organs would be attacked. Sometimes such cases are handled within another framework, in which Augustus would be considered possessed by an independent quote-unquote evil entity whenever Augustus II took over. Now again, if Augustus somehow changed his beliefs, it is possible that even within that framework some kind of cure would be effected. But at the same time, the dangers and difficulties would make such a cure relatively impossible. If a practitioner who believed that Augustus was possessed then convinced Augustus of the quote-unquote fact, their joint charged beliefs might possibly work for a while. Convincing Augustus that he was under the domination of an evil entity would be step 1. Step 2, getting rid of the intruder, could at least follow. The trouble is that working within that framework, the self-structure is further weakened, for the normally repressed characteristics of Augustus II are forever denied. Augustus must then always be quote-unquote good, and yet he would always feel vulnerable to another such invasion of evil. The same results as those given could be possible: the growth of suicidal tendencies or other self-destructive behavior. You may take your break. 1023. When all this started, brackets in late 1963, about speaking in trance, Jane said, I used to feel that there was just one word available at a time, with nothing before it or after it, but now I sense whole blocks of material there just waiting to be given, like the stuff on the speakers tonight earlier. Footnote. Jane referred here to the deleted part of tonight's session, and Seth's discussion therein of the work we are to do in translating early speaker material. Quote, the speaker manuscripts are in your future, and will involve, as I told you, considerable work, a labor of love. End quote. See the notes following the 623rd session in Chapter 5. Also consult Chapter 17 in Seth Speaks. End of footnote. It's like that more and more often, end quote. Before the session, Jane had again been aware of several channels of information available from Seth. Resume at 10:45. Dictation. Luckily, the human mind and body are far more flexible, durable, and creative than ever given credit for. Many cases like Augustus's never come to light. The individuals involved cure themselves. Sometimes this is done when such a person chooses to undergo a traumatic experience. Often one part of the personality will plan this quite deliberately while the other portion closes its eyes. These events can seem to be disasters or near disasters, and yet they can sufficiently mobilize the entire personality for survival's sake. In a moment of high critical tension, the personality may put itself together again. Such critical uniting episodes usually do not involve long sickness, though they may, but instead events such as bad accidents. The difficulty may be exteriorized as a broken limb, for example, instead of a broken self, and as the body is repaired, the necessary assimilation of belief takes place. There are various kinds and stages in such cases. Each individual is unique. Sometimes the framework includes another method of cure, in which portions of each conflicting side of the personality break off to form a clearer psychological structure which can communicate with the other two, act as a referee, and reconcile the opposing beliefs held by each. This is done many times without the main personality realizing what is really going on. On occasion, automatic writing is utilized, or the Ouija board. Both are methods to uncover invisible conscious beliefs that are accepted by you consciously at any given time, say, and deliberately ignored at another time. When people using such methods are told that their writing comes through from a demon or the devil or an evil spirit, then those invisible beliefs are shoved farther away. Any search into the mind becomes frightening and dangerous, since it might lead to further such quote-unquote invasion. Now, such invasion is usually the sudden appearance of previously unacceptable beliefs, quite conscious but invisible, tucked away. Then they suddenly appear as alien. In most instances, the possession concept makes it all the more upsetting. Easier to face often is the idea that the responsibility for such ideas must belong to another entity or being. In all cases of this nature involving Augustus-type episodes, the problem is one of unassimilated beliefs. Instead of such comparatively drastic behavior, however, such beliefs can be expressed through various parts of the body. Unfortunately, a system of medicine that largely deals with symptoms only encourages a patient to project such beliefs on new organs, for instance, after already sacrificing others in operations. The solutions lie in the conscious mind. I cannot emphasize this too strongly, and in those beliefs that you accept about the nature of reality and, specifically, about the nature of your being. While the most basic work must be done by the individual, help is always available from a variety of sources, both within and without. You will literally interpret and use almost any data that comes to you as helpful, and it will be highly effective, unless your beliefs lead you to think, perhaps, that everyone is against you, or that you are beyond help, or that you do not deserve it. Other such ideas can also close you off from help, of course, but you will instinctively look for it and use it when possible. You may take a break or end the session as you prefer. We'll take the break. 11:15 p.m. I chose a break in order to see if Jane still wanted me to ask Seth about the ideas she talked about before the session. She had been tired earlier, but had revived considerably by now. Nevertheless, she decided to forego the questions and end the session. All right, so that concludes that session. So we'll take a brief break and resume in a moment or two. I'm also going to see how much longer the chapter is. Oh, we're almost done. 2 more pages. Okay, so had a little break. Now let us continue. As soon as my tablet wants to cooperate. Session 630, December 11th, 1972, 9:26 p.m. Monday. Jane and I sat for the session at about 9:15. At 9:25, she abruptly told me that she just quote-unquote received the title of a book I am to write, Through My Eyes. She was very surprised, and so was I. At first, Jane said, she interpreted her information, brackets, from Seth, question mark, to mean that I would be writing a chapter with that title for one of her own books. But then she quickly realized that this is to be a work of my own. It's supposed to express my views of the Seth experience and how it has influenced or changed my ideas on art, life, and so forth. Then, as Jane told me about all of this, she announced that Seth was coming through right away, a most unusual procedure as far as our regular sessions are concerned. She took off her glasses. Now, the book title should be Through My Eyes, and it should be your own book, covering in your own way many important areas. You have writing ability, as you know. The book should cover your version of our joint experience, your own philosophical explanation of it, the questions it arouses within your own mind, your observations of Rupert as Jane and in our trance states. Other portions should explain your own ideas concerning creativity as you feel it in yourself, the differences and similarities between your experience when you paint a picture from quote-unquote usual inspiration and when, first of all, you perceive the psychic impression that leads to a painting. Some illustrations from an initial sketch to a completed painting should be included. Give some thought to experimentation, observing the nature of color in usual consciousness and in altered states. Pay attention to color in your dreams also. You should go into your own ideas about the people you paint and why, being fascinated with portraits, you often do not use models. The book can include some of the material I have given you on art through various channels and how you have applied it. This work can be followed by one utilizing sessions concerned with art mainly, but covering some other artistic areas as well, such as the nature and origin of inspirations. I have given you an outline that I am sure you can follow. The book should be fun to write besides, and combine your writing and painting abilities. The title is a good one and the book will sell. You will be able to get a contract on it with advance, and writing it will also serve as a spurt for your painting. I am being tricky here. Parentheses, are you? I tried to bait Seth a little here. I am indeed, for this will short-circuit some of your hang-ups as far as painting is concerned, and will lead to new spontaneous painting power, humorously. You will also consider it a work of merit, and you will be doing your own thing with your experience. I know that the impetus alone will quite slyly and automatically produce some excellent paintings. You will want to use them. I will not tell you in what particular way this sneaks by some of your problems now, or which ones are involved. I suggest that you do up a prospectus, an outline, and some few beginning pages, say a chapter or so. Now we will have a break, and that is my little surprise for both of you. I'll say, thank you. 9:42. I'm so surprised I haven't even put my glasses back on yet, Jane exclaimed after she'd come out of trance. Neither of us have been thinking of such a project, which isn't to say the idea of my doing a book involving Seth, at least in part, hasn't occurred to me occasionally. I'm really surprised when something like this happens to me in a session, Jane said. It's so different from what I've been thinking about or doing. I can see a center section of the book right now with your illustrations, and I can see Seth's portrait on the back cover. She pointed over her right shoulder to where the painting, which is reproduced in the Seth material, hangs on our living room wall, just in back of her rocker. Resume in the same active manner at 9:58. Now, this book will be a good advertisement for the later book that I will do, and if you insert what I have told you in the book I am doing now, people will already begin to look forward to your book. Parentheses, quote, that's pretty crafty. So include it in the nature of personal reality, for it is the birth of the book in your personal reality. I had several things in mind this evening. Some of Rupert's questions will be answered in our next chapter, which we will begin. Then I will have some other personal comment. And that's the end of chapter 6. The next chapter is entitled The Living Flesh, chapter 7, which I guess we will get to next time. Yes, we've been streaming for a good amount of time now, so we will wrap this up. I'm just going to see real quick, though, if I can, how long chapter 7 is, if I have it here. Oh, I do. Good. Well, let's see. Chapter 6 was from 102 to 117, and chapter 7 will be from 118 to 128. So chapter 6 was, I guess that would be 16 pages, including 102 and 117, and then chapter 7, 118 to 128, will be actually 11 pages, including 118 and 128. So, a little shorter chapter, but anyway, yeah, we'll get to those next time. It looks like chapter 8 is 20 pages, okay. All right, so thank you for everyone who has been here throughout the stream, and for everyone who watches when this is not live. That was my wrist cracking, if you wonder. I do that sometimes. Don't worry, don't be freaked out. I'm fine. But yeah, thanks for being here. Remember, I will be back on Wednesday with another stream. Not quite sure what I'm doing yet that day, but I'll be doing something, and I'll be doing, after whatever that initial something is, I'll be doing live tarot readings for donations that day. Or just do that if I don't end up having anything else planned. Then, of course, I'll be back on Saturday with another tarot card analysis stream. We'll be looking at the Devil card. That's sure to be very interesting. And then I'll be back, of course, indeed, as always, on Monday with another Seth stream. So that's about it. It is interesting, again, though, like how I mentioned at the beginning of the stream. Let me just address this real quick. How this very day I identified some conflicting or opposing beliefs of my own within me, within my mind, and that I've been sort of struggling to reconcile all day. It's so interesting, the timing of that, the synchronicity of that, because that hasn't really been an issue for me for a while. At least I don't think so. But I did identify that today, and then Seth ends up talking about opposing beliefs in the material we covered today. But the good news for my case, even if I don't find an answer right away, is that at least I'm aware of it. So at least I'm making an effort to reconcile the opposing beliefs. And as I was mentioning earlier, like it seems to mainly be a belief that says, oh, I should or at least could be at peace all the time if I wanted to. And there's maybe even not much point in trying to do that much. And a belief that says, but I don't just want peace all the time, I want excitement as well. I want to exercise my creativity and abilities, and I should be doing that at least some of the time. But what I'm thinking is that maybe the reconciliation for that opposition is the idea of maybe a belief that there should be an ebb and flow between peaceful states and excited states. And maybe if anyone else ends up having the same challenge, they could try adopting that belief as well. I don't know. I guess I'll just have to continue experimenting with it, figuring it out. I don't know. But what I do know is that opposing beliefs must be reconciled. And so yeah, going from moments of peace to excitement and creative activity. But of course, the reality is it's even more complicated than that for me. But it's, I'm not going to get all into it right here. It's not really relevant entirely, or it's not necessary to get into that many details. So, but anyway, I'll continue to try to figure this shit out. And if I have any significant findings, I'm sure I'll mention them at some point in one of my streams. If not, then I don't know, you can remind me or ask me if you are really that interested. We have a bit of a blur here at the very end. So again, thanks everyone for watching. I might be back here in a bit this evening after I eat lunch because I woke up that late today with some live tarot readings for donations of any amount. But other than that, see you guys later. Have a great day or night wherever you are.